Chapter 9, A Complete Melody. Bard could hardly keep still. He gripped his token from Father Tree and began to approach Sparring Tree. "Your song?" he said, and the tree shivered. "Why?" he asked. Bard recalled his mission and placed Father Tree's token to his lips. He then held it out and watched as the tree moved on its own towards him. The other dryads started to move as if surprised. Bard bit his lip. He wanted a bit more time before having to resort to the next stage. But he had delayed this as long as possible. He wanted to curse the bird. It had started all of this, but it was too late now. Kneeling down, Bard placed the token on the ground and sat back. Sparring Tree walked forward and its branches moved till one of them touched the token. As the tree placed its branch on the token, Bard strummed a single note on the fiddle. This position wasn't ideal at all and the note was a bit off-key. Despite his inward squelch at the sound, Sparring Tree stilled. Unfazed by the sudden stillness, Bard reached for the token. Branches parted and he grabbed the token before putting it around his neck. "I'm sure every dryad is going to try to kill me after this," he thought as he let out a deep sigh. It was a bit late to try to stop now. He pulled out the fiddle from the case and strummed a few of the notes before tuning it. He grabbed the bow and placed it across the bridge before taking a deep breath. He then finalized the formulation in his head and pulled the bow across the strings. A harmonious sound played out and he began to add the melody to the soundscape. Sparring Tree shifted in front of him and Kai walked over and sat near him. The bird from earlier took off and flitted about him before heading higher into the sky. As he continued to play, he noticed the interest from the other dryads. He steadied his hand and tried to ignore their words and confusion as he played on. Finally the song began to reach the end and he looked at Sparring Tree. This would be the finale. Would he get the reaction he was looking for? "Please," Bard thought as he pulled the last note out of the fiddle. He stood there for a moment and watched the tree quiver. Then it stepped back and Bard slumped. "Not quite the reaction I was hoping for," he thought as he sighed. His hand with the bow was at his chin as he began to contemplate what he had missed. Was the tune too complex? Or perhaps it was too fast? What if that's not the melody, but it should be close? Sparring Tree did shiver. "So I'm closer than I had anticipated. Though it would have been nice if I had gotten it right the first time." Bard groaned as he set the fiddle down and looked at his faithful companion. Kai came over and nuzzled into his hand and Bard pushed back. It wasn't good to be holding a relic while Kai wanted attention. He placed the fiddle back in its case and then rubbed Kai's furry head. The humming of the dog let him know that Kai liked it very much. And then the wolf looked between the fiddle and the tree. "If only I could hear your voice. I'm sure you could pick out what I missed," he said to Kai, who hummed as if he was sorry. "I know. You would help if you could. I appreciate it." He scratched behind Kai's ear and the wolf groaned as it placed his head down. The closed eyes and calm demeanor spoke about Kai's pleasure at being scratched there. Bard let a simple smile grace his face. He was disappointed, but he still had some time to figure this out. Kai would always be there for him, just like he had back in Father Tree's forest. Thinking of the place brought out a sad sigh. He missed the old tree who had raised him. He missed the safety and protection afforded in Father's forest. And he missed the wise words of comfort. Best not to dwell on such thoughts, he thought as he stretched and rolled his neck. He noticed the dryads approaching him and he quietly awaited for them, rising gently to stand and look at their eyes. The three guards approached and bowed before him in that respectful manner, catching him off guard. His eyes looked from one to the next until one rose and looked him hard in the eyes. "The elder wants to talk with you," this dryad said calmly. Bard nodded and looked to Kai, who was observing why his scratches had stopped. Bard patted the large wolf on the head before stepping towards the dryad. "Led the way," he said back as he closed his eyes with a slight bow. When he looked back at the eyes of the guard, they were still filled with suspicion, but also some acknowledgement. The guards turned about and filed out around him as he was guided to the elder. The horns of Sen's grandfather were easy to spot, but it wasn't until he took a turn around one of the older trees that he was able to see them. Bard acknowledged the old dryad, who smiled warmly and excused the guards. "I'm sorry for taking you away from your practice, but there is something I needed to talk to you about." "It's no problem. I've hit a wall, so it's nice to have a break," Bard answered as the dryad motioned for him to sit across from him. "Hit a wall? Such a human way to express that." Elwood chuckled. "Really? Indeed, we would say something like, in a tree without a voice, or that is the closest in human terms I could describe it as. In lingo sign voci, Bard asked in a sternum. Elwood's eyes grew wide and then he laughed a hearty laugh. No, it's actually sign in arboretum canticum. He wiped a bit of mirth from his eyes as they settled on Bard. Though that was quite a good guess. Bard listened to the elder sigh in delight at the exchange before speaking up. Pardon me, but I don't think you called me over to talk over the differences of our language. Indeed not. Sen will be here soon for lunch and asked that I chat with you beforehand. Sen suggested this. Bard asked. Of course she did. Tekka. There is much for you to learn, and unfortunately not a lot of time to learn it. Bard let out his breath with a slight groan. He knew this was true, but he also needed to get the elder tree's approval. Couldn't this wait till after? He wondered. He tried to be as relaxed as he could in this situation, but the waiting part was what bothered him. Couldn't Sen have called me over when she got here? Bard, you've heard the elder tree goes by the name War Tree? Elwood said as if sensing Bard's train of thought. War Tree, why go by such a gruesome name? I thought. SHHH. Elwood hushed. He looked around then sighed. Be careful where you voice such thoughts. You certainly are experienced with the other woods and their elder trees, but loss still affects the trees just as much as it does us. Elwood sighed and leaned back. That's as much as a hint as I dare give you, so if possible, let's turn our attention to your pledge. Bard bit his lip and Elwood's smile was one of patient understanding. In our eyes, you are so young, though I assume the way you carry yourself you are quite mature for your age. Elwood said as if appraising him. I wouldn't know, Bard said as he clenched his fist. I don't get along with the humans, so I have nothing to gauge your assessment against. A human shunned by his own. No wonder Sen took an interest in you, Elwood said. Bard stared past the dryad as memories flooded his mind. I don't think it's shunned as much as I terrify them. The hushed words escaped Bard's lips. Sorry. It might have to do with your equipment, though I imagine your mount is also terrifying, Elwood assessed. Bard bristled. Kai was more than a mount. Kai's my friend, not a mount, he said with a raised voice, and the dryad seemed surprised by his reaction. Bard sat back quickly, realizing what he had done. Sorry, no, it was my mistake in choosing that word. You obviously have suffered from it. The dryad tapped his horn as he acknowledged his slip. Though we've deviated from the original conversation, shall we return to it, please? Bard said, surprised at how well the dryad was communicating with him. Your pledge. Do you know what is required after you get War Tree's approval? Elwood asked. Bard had a vague idea, but if there were details, then he had no clue what they were. Elwood sighed, as if disappointed and knowing at the same time. Quadpooler, Elwood muttered. Before Bard could think through it, the dryad looked at him with a firm resolve. If you are accepted, there will be a celebration for the next week, though I imagine that many dryads will either avoid you while keeping their children away or curious about you, and approach you quite insistently. Despite my son's best effort, there is bound to be a few more like Sen who are very curious about you. Bard could only nod. He had some idea, but if he was truly accepted into the forest, it was anyone's guess how they would react. He certainly knew there were some who were hostile, totems to disarrant. Elwood muttered, and Bard perked up at the dryadic word for father's token. Who learns about the tokens? Bard asked, and Elwood flinched. Just muttering to myself. It's strange to think you know so much about our language. Father taught me. Your father, the elder tree I was raised by. Oh, right, well, that's also something that will need to be done. What will? Bard asked. Bard, you will need to travel with Sen for a time and help her gather the tokens, or at least the approval of all the elders you have met so far. Normally this wouldn't be an issue, but, he looked at Bard as the Tekka sat back. He had gained many tokens, more than most dryads, and now he had to go get the permission of his pledge to Sen from each of them. What else? Bard asked as calmly as he could. You'll need to get it done in 1 year. 1 year? Bard nearly jumped up. That would be impossible. It took him at least 2 to get his collection, and that was because Father Tree had assisted him in learning their songs. How do I realistically do that? Why is this even a rule? Though, if you don't return in a year, I'm sure my son would hunt you down. Why is that? because it meant that you failed and you have either killed Sen or taken her, like a hostage. What? Why would it mean that? It doesn't, but that is how he would take it. Elwood shrugged and Bard wanted to slam his forehead against the table. Why do they have such unreasonable expectations? He groaned, and Elwood chuckled. It was a custom set with good intentions. A child of the forest should be paired with someone of nearly equal standing in the eyes of the elders, and should they be unable to accomplish that, then they aren't to be married to one another. Bard stiffened. What did you say? Elwood seemed confused, and then a knowing smile hit his eyes. Which part are you confused about? Elwood asked, and Bard looked about. There weren't any other dryads nearby. He was wondering when Sen would appear as he leaned closer to the elder. Not getting married, that part, he said softly. Elwood closed his eyes as he sat back. Bard was sure he understood the implications of that question. I'm sure Sen has already thought of that. She seems to like you, but this situation seems to be her way to protect you. Though, if you don't return, even the two of us won't be able to keep her father from hunting you down. Bard groaned. I don't need more enemies, and I don't want to spend all my time hiding in father's woods. I'm sure the one who rescued me would be disappointed if that is what happened to my life. Bard, a childish-sounding Sen said as she flung her arms around him and giggled. Bard avoided the bag of food she brought as it aimed for his head. Hi Sen, he said calmly. Glad for the distraction. Welcome. We've been waiting, Elwood said calmly. He seemed to be speaking more plainly now. Perhaps it was for Sen's benefit. Bard had a decent grasp of the Dryadic language, though it was without the culture. Sen would need to grasp the Tekka language now, especially if they were to be traveling together, though he doubted they could hide that lively hair of hers so she could blend in. Well, food's ready, Sen said with an amused grin. She placed it out on the table and Bard reached for his tokens. He thought of Father Tree as Sen began to dish out the food. The portion she set in front of Bard looked more like his normal fare than what she placed before her grandfather. As she sat down with her own food, she grinned and Elwood regarded her kindly. For all intents and purposes, Sen's family really seemed to care about her. But where was her mother? He had never heard mention of her from either of the men in her life. He assumed the grandmother had passed away, but wouldn't it normally be up to the mother to discern if the man who wanted the daughter's hand was worth the effort? Sen and Elwood chatted peaceably, and eventually Bard returned to his training. Kai waited for him and eagerly greeted him before he attempted the next run on the song. His curiosity made it more difficult, though no less troublesome than when the bird had suddenly appeared. He wondered which elder tree had sent it. It was possible Father Tree had, but it was also possible War Tree had instigated Sparring Tree. There were enough reasons for either conclusion that he didn't seem to have a straightforward answer. He concluded the training, and was guided back to the tree, where Kai and him retired comfortably for the night. The next day they were woken roughly by the sounds of Dryadic voices outside. As they roused and looked around, the sounds died off with exclaims of being caught. Bard chuckled. Their curiosity was growing, and now they dared to peek in on him and Kai while they slept. Such a childlike thing to do, but also normal when you are worried of confronting someone while they are awake. He stretched and then heard the sounds of Sen giggling. He looked out and noticed she was the one bringing him his instrument today. Good morning, Sen, Bard said with a final stretch as he rose. Kai's head looked over and then he too was up, and pushing past Bard with a very excited pant. He stopped short of the girl, and she began scratching his chin as she set the instrument case down. Kai's large tail was hard to get past as he wagged it back and forth, and thumped it as she changed scratching places. Bard sighed. Kai, can you? The wolf looked back and then stopped wagging his tail long enough for him to get through, and shortly resumed as Bard grabbed the case. Morning, Bard. Sleep well? Sen asked. Yes. How about you? Did you sleep well? He asked. She nodded, and then grinned a deep grin that made her eyes slit, as she scratched Kai with more vigor. Good Kai, you like these? She said with a sing-song voice, and Bard let a chuckle escape off his teeth. Sen also laughed and Kai was soon laying on the floor in complete bliss. Bard spent a bit of time tuning the fiddle and checking the strings. When he was ready, Sen guided them to the arena where Keith and Sparring Tree were waiting for him. This time he pulled out his token and waited till the others gave them space. He greeted Sparring Tree and then let the token hang in the air. When he saw the tree quiver, he spun the token around and around, letting the droning sound begin. Sparring Tree trembled and began to move, and Bard walked to the side. This tree, if it was one of the oldest, it should have a song similar to War Tree, but it hardly sung it. He found this concerning as he worried War Tree had abandoned the origin song due to the fighting. If he could remind War Tree of the origin song, then perhaps he wouldn't need to fight. If not, he would likely die, and all this was happening tomorrow. He had listened to the entire woods on the first day, and the second he had listened to the influencing song. Now he needed the origin song. After a bit, he pulled the fiddle into position and began to play the song from yesterday. Sparring Tree stilled. Then a sound pierced Bard's ears. He stopped and looked back to see Elwood humming a tune. Sparring Tree also seemed unnaturally quiet. As Bard listened, he heard the song he had been gathering harmonize with this tune, and an idea struck him. He played a few notes with his fingers plucking strings, and then brought the bow up and began to play. He didn't try to replace the tune from Elwood, instead he harmonized with it. Elwood stopped and stared while Bard kept playing. The two stared each other down before Bard bowed and then looked at Sparring Tree. He sorted the notes and realized that this would be a most difficult piece. Some places he had two notes to play and his fingers barely could support the two strings that he could hit while playing those notes together. He could likely do this better with the guitar or some other instrument, but those were both bulky and he had left them with Father Tree for this journey. He thought through it, and then tentatively practiced the parts until his fingers were not against the movements. Then he brought the bow up and played the harder chords until he was satisfied, and added them into the complete version. Sparring Tree began to move and came very close before moving his branches around Bard, but never touching him. He finished the song quickly and then approached Sparring Tree and placed Father's token to its trunk. As he did so, he heard the song softly sung back to him from the tree and sat down and listened. A couple notes were different, but overall, he had managed to find the song. He would need to thank the elder dryad for his assistance before the day was over. Eventually he heard a dryadic voice command Sparring Tree to move, and Bard emerged from the branches unscathed, which seemed to surprise Keith and Sen, who were just outside. Sen jumped and wrapped her arms around him and buried her head into his shoulder. "Are you hurt?" she asked, and Bard returned the hug. "No, I'm fine," Bard said, and Sen leaned back and looked up into his eyes before glancing up and down to make sure. She sighed with relief and then leaned against Bard. "I was worried when Sparring Tree ate you," she said, and Bard laughed. The image of the tree wrapping around him probably did look similar to a metaphorical swallowing, and since he hadn't been worried about it, it made him appreciate her concern a bit differently. As he held Sen, his gaze lifted to look at Keith, who closed his eyes as he took in a breath of relief. "Paratus S?" Keith asked, and Bard nodded. He was ready to face the trial of War Tree. He looked down at Sen in his arms, and took a long breath before looking skyward. As he saw a few birds flitting about, he was as ready as he could be. Tonight he would practice the tune and the fingerings, and the rest would be judgment of the elder tree.